Hey guys, welcome to today's podcast. Today we're going to be going over legacy workplace and on premise environments versus cloud only infrastructure, and then also hybrid environments where you have a mixture of both of those. And we're going to be going over some of the pros and cons of each of those and the end user and IT support experience. So, with that, let's get into it. Well, cool. Thanks for joining us today, Stefan and Julio, on podcast number 2 about legacy versus modern workplace and what that means, right? And then kind of a hybrid between the two types of workplaces, if you will, and how most organizations are set up. So, Stefan, maybe you could give us a little bit of an intro on the three types of environments at a high level as you see them.
Yeah, of course. Well, the three levels are quite simple. You have the legacy environment, with servers and all your software local, and very little software in the cloud. And then there's the hybrid environment where you're started moving to the cloud. You still have your on-prem servers, but you start using certain cloud apps like Microsoft 365, maybe email in the cloud or your SharePoint in the cloud, and still having your on-prem environment. And then there's the most mature configuration is cloud only, where you leave all your servers behind, you decommission all your servers, and everything is in the cloud. All your apps are cloud apps.
Yeah, pure play, like SaaS applications, Entra ID, Microsoft 365, VoIP phones, pretty much in every case. So there's very little dependency on the network at that point.
Yeah.
Other than just Wi-Fi connectivity.
Probably only that. And if you look into a server closet, you only see a couple of switches, a couple of cables, and there shouldn't be any servers anymore.
Yeah. So with legacy workplace, the first thing I think I'd like to kind of clarify for the viewer is we use that term, but it's not designed to be derogatory or anything like that. It's just sort of the more tried and trusted form of deployment, right? It's what we've known for multiple decades at this point: Active Directory and servers and a network and VPNs, all that sort of stuff, right? That's what we kind of define as that legacy workplace because it's starting to age out, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Your data exists on your environment that you own, on your local servers, and you don't have any online accounts or you don't have any. It's all local.
Yeah. How many companies today are purely on premise? Maybe the government. Yeah, right.
I don't think the government is on-prem because, of course, Microsoft has the government
cloud too. Yeah, so they're hybrid. So yeah. It's almost very, very few organizations at this point still hosting email on a server, right? And running literally everything on premise. So pretty much what we're going to talk about is some of the pros and cons of that traditional infrastructure, pros and cons of that hybrid infrastructure where you kind of have both worlds, and a lot of organizations are sitting in that state right now, and then that cloud only customer, right? So maybe talk us through a little bit of some of the benefits of that tried and trusted on-premise equipment. What's the good things of it?
Well, your data is in your servers. There's nothing in the cloud, so it could feel more secure because you can always unplug your data. If something happens, it's on your servers.
You can physically touch the disk.
Yeah.
In many cases, right?
Yeah. A legacy environment, it seems more secure because you own your data. It's on your servers.
Yeah.
But it's quite expensive to keep it secure. And many people don't see that cloud is actually cheaper because of it's more of an
operational
expense.
The total cost of ownership, right, is something to look at. So if you're looking at the total cost of ownership for on-premise to have the battery backups, the resilient network infrastructure and internet infrastructure, the auditing tools, right? The additional third-party capabilities to actually gain the same security that you have by default in the cloud, the total cost of ownership really starts to add up. And like you said, I mean, a lot of times moving to virtual machines in the cloud or data stored in the cloud has a lot of benefits because some of those things are just out of the box and it's quicker to deploy. So that's definitely a conversation, is that kind of total cost of ownership and the availability and the ability to restore quickly, and that sort of thing for sure is a difficult part of it. Julio, maybe talk on an on-premise infrastructure. What are some of the things on the network layer that become tricky for frontline support too? Stuff like group policy and needing line of sight and that sort of stuff. Like, yeah, talk us through that.
Yeah, for sure. As far as like deployment and making sure that everything is compliant with like group policy and all that, you do have to have, like you mentioned, that line of sight, right? So you have to be connected to the domain, whether it's by preset of VPN or they're like on-site connected with an Ethernet cable or Wi-Fi if they're pre-configured to be added to those groups and stuff. And so making sure that that's first set up, and then you can kind of do like more of those downstream things, like adding specific software or whatever it is kind of eliminated once you get into like the fully on cloud environments, because then you're able to like just hop on anywhere and really like work from anywhere.
Yeah. And even in a hybrid sense, like there's ways to have that on-premise equipment and still cloud join your computer for policy and for logging in and that sort of thing.
Right.
In fact, I just got out of a sales meeting where we were discussing executive leadership concerns because they had some past problems with Active Directory authentication in the field. And that connectivity you're talking about with VPNs, you need to be on a VPN to see that server because it's designed in a legacy way. So like I said, that meeting that I literally just had, they were hesitant to even join devices again because they're experiencing those issues.
Right.
And they don't want to take their people down.
Right. And if that's a thing that you can remove from like having to deal with, another thing that can, a variable that can break like along your chain of connectivity, then like it's a trade-off. If you do move to that like full cloud and stuff, which I think we're going to get more into here shortly.
Yeah. Yep. So let's talk a little bit on some of the other maybe cons of an on-premise only environment, or the elements that are attached to on-premise. What are some downsides of on-premise?
Well, the first one is probably it's a capital expense. It's 3 or 5 years, you need to buy new servers. And that's a big expense. Instead of cloud being an operational expense, which we'll talk about later. And you need to maintain all those servers. You need to do the physical upgrades. You need to do the software upgrades yourself. Not only doing software upgrades, maybe firmware upgrades on your server.
Yeah.
You need to do it all yourself. Not only firmware upgrades, maybe you need to add a couple of disks. You need to physically go in there to add disks.
Sometimes that brings in downtime too.
More downtime.
Yep.
Yeah, we've seen that. On-premise hardware, a lot of times, if it's under warranty and it's newer, it's not aged out by like 10 years, a lot of times that stuff is really reliable. But we do see cases where you have some piece of hardware on the server fail, and all of a sudden, you're scrambling to get parts. Maybe you didn't have them on standby like you should have, but now you're waiting like a day or 2 days, whatever, and you're having to do a restore plan because your hardware is failing. So yeah, the hardware level of it is sort of a pro and con in itself. You do have complete control over it, but it can present some downtime in certain cases. So talk to me a little bit about the policy management, and we can talk about the end user experience too of group policy versus modern policy management in Microsoft Intune.
Yeah, of course. The most important thing if you're using a legacy network or legacy servers is that you have policies. And you need to have line of sight with your network to get those policies. So if you change anything, security settings, those policies won't be applied to people in the field unless they're connecting to their VPN.
What is line of sight?
Line of sight is when you need to see your servers. Your device needs to see your servers.
Okay.
And you can do that by plugging it into the network in the office. So you need to be in the office.
Yeah.
Or in some cases, you can apply policies through a VPN. But then the user needs to start their VPN, which adds more hassles for the user because when they start to work, they need to start their VPN and able to access files.
Yeah, so it's dependent. It goes back to that dependency on the on-premise side, and I would say from our front line with some of the hybrid customers we have, group policy is usually pretty consistent, right, on the front line
I would
with
say so.
VPNs.
Yeah.
But it's just one more thing that could go wrong. You know, if
Right.
we do see the occasional issue with like printers or shared drives or whatever's coming from that group policy
Yeah.
because of the network layer.
Yeah, well, one thing I want to point out that Stefan was mentioning here with like having to have that line of sight, right? You have to be able to see that domain, be able to see that network. Imagine if you have workers that are remote, right? Like you can't just buy a machine, send it to their home, and then have it set up. You have to send it to yourself, set it up, whether it's at your MSP or like at your HQ, and then send it out to them. So that's one of like
Yeah, it's clunkier
that
from a setup
yeah,
standpoint,
yeah,
right?
and it just takes longer. There's more variables that can like break on it and stuff. So
Yeah.
for like pushing the policies too, like for updates, you have to be able to like get into your machine, turn on that VPN, and be able to like push for that. So
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about something else. One of the reasons that people have traditional infrastructure, well, there's several applications, file shares, different things like that, databases. Let's talk a little bit on accessing those. So, you know, you might have a laptop or a desktop that has the client software accessing that stuff directly, or you might have RDP, for example. There's a lot of usage of remote desktop protocol, you know, the little blue computer that you go click on your desktop and you try to connect in. Talk to us a little bit about that. What are some of its benefits and how is it starting to show some of its age too?
Yeah, of course. You can use your remote desktop app, your little blue computer on your desktop, to connect to your computer in the office. But then you have your laptop and your computer in the office, or maybe a big server that hosts a couple of virtual computers. But you need infrastructure. And one of the problems with a legacy workplace, we didn't mention that before, is you need to plan your capacity way ahead. You need to know what your capacity is in 5 years, because your servers will be running for 5 years.
So it might be good for a small firm that is always at 10 or 15 people, but if you're growing, it's difficult because then you got to buy everything much bigger than you need.
Yep.
It's hard provisioned. You know, you've bought the physical equipment and like you said, so it's locked in versus the flexibility of doing some of these things in a modern cloud environment.
Yeah, in the cloud, you simply buy a couple of licenses and you will get your new capacity instantly.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it later, but the legacy workplace, you need to plan ahead. Maybe you didn't plan exactly well, so you need to add more memory, add more hard drives, and you need to change something to your servers, more downtime. And, well, maybe you need to, I'm sorry.
It's all good. You can clip it out.
Yeah. Well, the legacy workplace has a lot of disadvantages in case of planning. For example, companies with a lot of seasonal workers, they have a lot of capacity in their servers, and it's probably sitting unused for a couple of months. But they're still paying for the power
Well,
bill.
yeah, we've seen examples where somebody brings in like a contractor, outside contractor for some services, or yeah, like you said, maybe just temporary people. Being able to spin up a cloud instance for that individual to gain access to their on-premise resources is the quickest, easiest way to do it. And then you can just spin it down as soon as they're done. So it gives a lot more flexibility. And I think that's one thing we can kind of roll into is the fact that most organizations at this point are hybrid. There's very, very few organizations that have everything, including their email, on-premise. So pretty much everybody's hybrid at this point. And with certain things like line of business applications, we can use more modern solutions than remote desktop, for example. So you can kind of have the best of both worlds. You can still have your traditional file shares and your traditional applications, business applications, but start to blend the on-premise with the cloud together, right? How can we do that? What are a couple different ways?
Yeah, well, the easiest way is, of course, to move to a hybrid environment. To start moving your apps to the cloud and still keeping your file shares or your legacy apps, because you can combine them both. And that's a pretty nice way to allow your users to still use legacy apps, but also allow users to use more modern apps. You still need a VPN to access your legacy file shares, etc. But users will start working in Teams and in SharePoint. And if they're only accessing Teams and SharePoint, they don't need their VPN. They can even use their phone to access documents.
Yeah, and so you start to get the benefit of the benefits of both worlds, right?
Yeah.
So you're getting the best of both. The cloud has the scalability, instant provisioning, some built-in security and logging on these certain things, and then still have those on-premise resources. So it's really a journey, right? A journey from these traditional tried and true methods, and over time starting to lift and shift or just completely change the applications that you might be using, right? But for many organizations, how long could that take? If you're a large organization with many operational components,
it could take years, of course. Yeah. But if you stay in a hybrid environment, you're good for now.
Yeah.
Because you can still have your legacy file shares and still use Teams. You'll start moving your files to OneDrive, for example, so you don't have your classic files on a file server, and still have your legacy environment. And starting moving your files to OneDrive opens your possibilities to use or to move to the cloud only, because your files are already there. So it's a long journey. You can also stay in a hybrid environment for quite a long time, which is fine because you get all the benefits of the cloud.
For many companies, like for larger enterprises, maybe for the foreseeable future, they're going to be hybrid because they don't have any alternative software that they've identified for estimating or finance packages. It's out there in many cases, but they haven't identified it. So for their foreseeable future, they're going to be hybrid forever.
But I was going to say, I guess that leads to the question then, how will a business know, okay, now is the time to like move over? Now,
that's a good question.
Now we've gotten enough usage out of this hybrid environment. How do we know, okay, it's time to ditch all the legacy stuff, go into the future?
I think it's a combination of both the internal leadership of the company and the IT to understand what are the alternatives. Maybe you have an estimating software to bid your projects or something like that, right? What other major alternatives are out there in the industry? Do they support modern authentication and different things? Are they hosted by the vendor? And that's a whole thing that we could get into. A lot of vendors are just lifting and shifting their old school application over to remote desktop, like we were just talking about, and calling that cloud.
Right.
And it kind of is, but a real cloud application is like purely in the browser, essentially, right? Yeah. It is direct connectivity over the web. It's not an install or anything like that, right? And that's what we kind of coined as a SaaS application or a subscription-based model, which is really common for all sorts of stuff, finance packages, and pretty much every line of business software out there has some equivalent. But we've seen a lot of industries really suffer because the vendors that are offering solutions are way behind.
Right.
And it's going to take them many more years to get modernized into a SaaS application.
Right.
So they're going to be working with that for a while.
Yeah.
And there are solutions for that. We can still move all users to the cloud and still keep the hybrid environment. For example, Windows 365. You can give users, if for example, if you're using a legacy app and only maybe 10% of your company is still using it, well, then move to the cloud and keep those 10 users in the legacy environment, or move the 10 users to the cloud and give them access to a Windows 365 session in their legacy environment.
Yeah, and what you're painting a picture of is that it's not 1 or a 0. It's not black or white. It's art. Like that's IT. You can design it to be carved up. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. And one fantastic thing to be talking about in terms of that is traditional file shares versus SharePoint. What are some of the problems that we experience on the front line when a SharePoint deployment it becomes challenging?
Well, really depends on what like the challenge is, but space can be an issue.
Yep, we've seen that. Because by default, you get a certain amount of SharePoint space per license, right? Sure. So you have to extend that SharePoint space.
Yeah.
What I would say is we're seeing this pretty frequently. There's a lot of companies like just lifting and shifting, bringing everything over. And at the beginning, that might work because it wasn't that many files or it wasn't that large, and the company grows or they just start throwing a ton of stuff in there. And OneDrive they use to synchronize SharePoint sites or Teams, right? And
Right.
a lot of companies are using that, and their users are expecting it to be just like a file share, right? It's like, I want everything to be there instantly. And OneDrive does suffer from sync issues and the maximum ability of
Yeah.
files. So
Yeah.
there's
The
definitely some
latency.
yeah, from all sorts of things.
Yeah.
So SharePoint's a fantastic solution, but it's a bit different way of doing things from a file share. It's not
Right.
exactly the same. It has additional capabilities and features and benefits, but there are some downsides too, just like there's downsides with file shares
Sure.
as well.
Yeah. Well, I think really one of the biggest upsides though, yeah, you do have sometimes like the sync issues that can happen, which a lot of those can be resolved with like simple troubleshooting. Just restart your computer, restart the OneDrive application.
Maybe you have to reset OneDrive, right?
Sure, yeah, that can happen.
Or helping them with lifecycle maintenance, right?
Yeah.
What do you actually need? Do you need 1 million files?
Right.
Or do you need 100,000 of those? And
Yeah.
how can we help you get that cleaned up?
I think a lot of that, a lot of those issues can be, to play devil's advocate here, they can be offset by the availability that you have with those files, utilizing OneDrive and SharePoint.
Yeah.
Like I said earlier, like you can go work anywhere in the world and still have all your files. You don't have to worry about a VPN. Like
yeah.
I think
there's
that's such
co-authoring, there's
a huge
versioning
trade-off.
built in,
Exactly.
there's
Yeah.
security logging built in.
Yeah, exactly.
It's tied to modern groups, which can be audited a lot easier. So there's tremendous benefit to it, but it does require some adoption and some different ways of interacting with it. In many cases, we push for using the Teams client or the web client because then your limitations start to erode with those. But yeah, there's a lot to talk about, on both of those solutions. But what I was trying to get to is that it doesn't have to be black or white. You could have a file share and SharePoint, and probably that's the best answer. There's use cases for each one.
Sure.
For example, a common one is like marketing. We deal with that a lot. They've got
Yes.
a lot of files,
Yes.
a lot of storage space. So traditional file shares are often like a really great place for marketing.
Yeah, usually
other
because
stuff
you need
like
it
that.
instantly. It like, needs to be there.
They're large files. Yeah. So I think that's prevalent in pretty much everything we talk about here is that there's going to be those pros and cons. And with hybrid, you can understand and be educated around the pros and cons of each solution and
Right.
kind of figure out how to carve it up. Maybe certain departments or certain users are on this and other users are on this, and that's totally fine. That's okay. And then you're gaining the benefits of both of those at the same time.
Well, maybe for the end user, the most important thing to remember is SharePoint is not a file share; it's a document library. It's for your documents. And like you told, marketing has a lot of large video files. That's not what SharePoint is built for. So you need a file share. And still, file shares can still be used in a cloud-only environment or a hybrid environment. So users, of course, need to know that they put all their documents in SharePoint, because then you have all the features like collaboration. You can work in, two users can work in the same document at the same time. That's not possible in file shares. And file shares are more suitable for big video files, or maybe if you have something with 1 million files, you put it on a file share. And SharePoint's more for documents, like
Yeah.
PowerPoint and
Yeah.
Excel.
Yeah, and it's about trying to figure out how to use both in many cases because they're both sort of necessary. If you have an on-premise file share, how are you going to share anything with customers or co-author or like some of these things that people are coming to expect now in a modern workplace? You can't really do those with file shares, right? So you really need to keep SharePoint around and be able to share with external parties and different things like that. So it's sort of figuring that out. And we're able to sort of modernize the approach for shared drives with stuff like Azure Files, right? So that's where Azure can come in, and a traditional service like a shared folder, a map drive, can be placed in Azure Files. And maybe you even have a server on site to speed up the access to that. But it's another option too, versus having.
That's an option. We can utilize Azure file shares. It is a legacy file share, but it's hosted
As a
in Azure.
service.
Yeah, and to speed up stuff, you can use an on-prem server as some sort of a cache server. So users still have the advantage of a file share because file shares are fast if you have your servers on-prem. So now we can host all those files in Azure for redundancy and for security, and still have your on-prem server just to increase the speed to your file share just a little.
Yeah. Let's make a pivot a little bit towards security of on-premise versus cloud and where we're heading. So with a traditional environment, like an on-premise Active Directory sort of server environment, what were the key things to secure that 15 years ago?
Yeah, it was mostly based on your network. You usually secure your network. You use firewalls. You put users in a specific network segment, and all security is based on your network. And there's the problem with that is that if you move users outside of your office, well, then they don't have the necessary security that they need.
Yeah.
And that's different in a modern workplace or in the cloud workplace, even in a hybrid environment, because your security is moving to the user itself. The user needs to approve their multi-factor. The user gets audited for what they do. If they change a file in SharePoint, it's audited. And in the legacy workplace, it's more based on network security than on the data itself.
It's building the moat, right? Like, so you put the servers in the middle, you try to protect it with the network layer. You're really particular about hardening servers and workstations and endpoint detection, because it's all about trying to prevent people from getting in versus, in a more modern environment. And even today with on-premise, everything's kind of shifting to identity. And in fact, I saw a statement by the Blackpoint cybersecurity CEO that said that like some percentage over 50% of attacks were just coming in from identity. So and this is a company that monitors endpoint detection, right? He's saying, a lot of these attacks are not coming in from malware anymore. That's still happening, but it's mostly attacks on the identity or the login.
They're only doing that because it's cheap. They have bots and they're just trying to do that to get into legacy workplaces, which do still exist. And most attacks nowadays are on the user itself. They send you an email, please click on this link, and then the link says, well, enter your password. The legacy workplace doesn't protect against these types of attacks because the email got through the firewall. The user clicked on the email. They entered their password.
Yep.
And then their account got compromised.
Yeah, so it's a lot about account compromise, then leading to potential device like malware or, certain emails, they may be trying to get you to install malware, browser stealer, or something like that. But it's most of the time they're trying to get into your account and stage more phishing attacks. They're trying to gain access to that sort of stuff. So identity is becoming one of the biggest areas of focus now. And in a hybrid environment, things like the network layer and the endpoint protection layer, they're still important, but identity is starting to take like that number one position for sure.
Yeah.
And especially with these attacks, like if they're getting into the user's identity, the logs, the security, the securability, the ability to secure the environment rather is really, really imperative. So let's kind of switch over to cloud-only environment now. And this environment where you have no servers, you have no traditional line of business programs that you install on a computer. In most cases, maybe you have some like Adobe or AutoCAD or something else, but all of your storage, all of your users are in the cloud only. What are some benefits of that, Julio?
In terms of like manageability or usage
Anything
for users?
Yeah. How does it impact the everyday user? How does it impact our supportability of it? Just give us your thoughts on cloud only.
I think it really boils down to availability. Like we had mentioned before multiple times, you have your data right there. You can sign in anywhere. You can sign in other users onto your machines fairly quickly. You can hop in and all of your policies and everything will be automatically applied because it's going off like that identity, right? And so it's kind of like trickles down onto your organization managed machines.
Yeah.
And so those are really like the big benefits that I
would
say.
When you say like sign in, right? You just sign in and you start getting policies. That's so different than like needing to pre-set up a device or get a VPN going and then have them sign in.
Right.
And all that kind of stuff, right? Or ship the device somewhere, set it up, and then send it to them. So for customers that we have that are maybe out of state, or they have people working from home fully, and we want to send that right to a house in another state, we're able to do that, and it's totally no problem.
Yeah.
Because as long as they have internet, it's manageable.
Yeah, and then you have obviously on the back end for us where it looks like you have user management and then you have device management with like Intune and all these other items. So it really works out really good.
Yeah, and in particular, you know, getting to the desired configuration state for the device too, or what that means in more simple terms is like getting all the software and the setup done for the user. How much easier is that?
Oh, it's super quick. I mean, I would say obviously if all of your stuff is on SaaS,
Yeah.
it's like SaaS applications and stuff, then like, yeah, it'll take like 15 minutes for the most part sometimes.
Yep. And on our previous episode, we talked about like the Windows profiles and being able to switch between users more quickly in a modern setup sense. So yeah, it really makes that much quicker, and it allows us to just get the desired configuration more easily.
Right.
And in a modern way, using kind of automation and Intune policies and that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, maybe one example. If someone needs a laptop like right now because their laptop was stolen and secured, of course, then they just walk into the Best Buy, get a new laptop, they sign in with their work account, and all policies get applied, and we can fully secure the laptop, and we didn't even touch the laptop.
Right. Given that it's a Windows Pro machine.
Yeah, of course.
Don't listen to this guy.
So, but he brings up a good point though, right?
No,
like even if it was a home machine, right? Okay, sure, we can provide activation keys, right? That you purchase afterwards, and then we can still get the process started a lot quicker than okay, well, we have to go and buy the machine now. Then we're gonna ship it to you. It's like it just saves so much time.
Yeah. We have a pretty clean process for upgrading Windows Home. You know, we try to tell our customers to get computers through us, or at least get advice so that they know what the minimum specs are. But yeah, you have to have Windows Pro. So Best Buy, one downside is they come with Home.
Yeah.
People think, oh, I'm gonna just like hop right in on my work account. So they do have to reach out to us to get a Pro product key. So go buy Pro, please.
Yeah.
But outside of that, the point still stands. It's just making it easier for people to go acquire hardware. And if it meets the specifications that we need for performance and it has Pro and everything, we don't really care as much where it comes from. You know, we want to care less about making everything perfect, although we do recommend that for customers. You know, standardize your fleet, try to get the same models and brands of laptops. It is a better or easier way to manage devices. But at the same time, maybe you need to go grab a device. Maybe you need to get that up and running quickly, and maybe you're out of state. The importance is that we can get it done a lot faster. I think that is really important.
Yeah.
Maybe talk a little bit about single sign-on. What is single sign-on? Both a hybrid customer and a cloud-only customer could use this, but why do companies need to be looking at single sign-on? What is it?
Most important, of course, security and then user happiness. Imagine having your cloud apps all using the same account. First of all, you don't need to remember different passwords. So there's no need to write them down anymore because you have one password to access your device, and that password also works for your apps, for your teams, maybe for your third-party apps. And for the user, it's much easier, and for the company, it's more secure because they have one place to get their auditing tools and one place to get their security, and they have one place to set up all the security.
Yeah, and so is it just synchronizing the password, or how does that work on like sort of a high level? Is it just a password synchronization, or?
No, it's not a password synchronization. You just give the third-party app access to your environment. So the third-party app can use the Microsoft authentication tools to authenticate their app.
And so all of the conditional access controls and the security of the Microsoft account, multi-factor, and different things that we specify are required before they get into that application. Yeah. So it is significantly more secure and more convenient. Your users aren't having to set up separate and distinct accounts in each program, and they're benefiting from all the security too.
Yeah, you can, for example, if a user has a virus on their laptop, then their computer won't be compliant anymore. So they won't have access to company data anymore.
Including those third-party applications.
Including those third-party apps.
Yeah.
Correct.
No, that's 100% something that we're trying to focus on for our clients, and also the automated provisioning of users. That is really crucial, right? Not only do we want to set up that single sign-on for the authentication, but if the application supports it, we want to automatically provision it. So if that user gets set up in Microsoft, then they're automatically set up in the third-party software. And that automated provisioning not only saves a ton of time for everybody involved, but it ensures that when that user gets offboarded in Microsoft, they're getting offboarded on the other programs too. They're getting pulled out of there.
There's only one switch to disable the password.
Exactly. So go look for a single sign-on for your applications whenever supported. Go look for automated provisioning, because it's not just for enterprises. It is for everybody, and it's both convenience and security in major ways. Yeah, I think that covers a lot of different things on these different types of setups. Yeah, any other thoughts that you guys have in general? Maybe let's just go on a general level, kind of talk about what we see with customers. If you were starting an organization today, what are the things you're looking for in your business? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I would say I want to make it as easy as possible for my employees to be able to get onto new machines, for them to be able to access their data, and also make it as easy as possible for myself as the organization owner. Obviously, I'm going to be the administrator for that place, to be able to manage them. And so I think depending on like our specific needs, obviously if we need any of like these more closed applications, legacy applications, then there is a place for a hybrid environment, but I would always try to pivot more towards how can I make a fully like online Azure environment work for myself, right?
Yeah.
And just because, like I've said before, the trade-offs they work really well. And even if you do need like an on-prem file share, you have other options. Like you can utilize a NAS, you can utilize like all these other things.
What's a NAS?
It is basically like a tiny little server for like all your files and stuff.
Yeah, network attached storage. It's just it's like a file share, and that's the only thing that it does.
Yeah, and so, but that's like if we have like a high like density, we need a lot of storage that gets moved very fast, a lot of files for like movies or whatever, right? But if it's more like documents and stuff, then SharePoint works fine. So I think that's how I would structure my environment.
So if you're a net new company, try to go with SaaS applications, try to go with cloud only, because it's just more streamlined.
Yeah, I mean, and we see it with our clients now too, right? We have some clients where setup takes 10 minutes, 15 minutes sometimes.
Yeah.
Because most of their stuff is really SaaS applications. And then we have others that take a little bit longer because we have to make sure that we have all these other components added in, that they have line of sight and stuff. So we have to configure line of sight to their environment here. So, and it's just like, it kind of gets...
Yeah, it gets crazy.
Yeah, but it just makes it so much easier to be fully online.
The thing I think is that companies need to be having a IT department or somebody managing their IT that is building them a roadmap and scrutinizing their setup constantly, right?
Yeah.
Throughout the years, and saying, what should we be looking at doing? How are we going to slice and dice this? What's going to get moved? What's not? What are the pros and cons? What are the costs? All that stuff has to be considered, because those are all necessary questions to answer so you can make the right decision. Oftentimes, companies are just really gung-ho on like cloud everything. Let's move everything to Azure. Let's get rid of it. But sometimes that's not the right answer. It might have downsides that outweigh the benefits for your particular organization or setup. So we try to take a more holistic approach, which is like analyzing all those different dimensions and just kind of knowing the company, knowing the culture of their people over time, and learning that, because all those things play into what we recommend. We've seen just bringing stuff over to the cloud too quickly, and then the culture doesn't keep up with it, and it just fails because it might have a lot of benefits, but the users just aren't ready for kind of understanding that difference in workflow and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So.
And that's why I think a lot of organizations right now being on that hybrid environment is a really good stepping stone. And this stepping stone might last 5-7 years, right?
Or
but
more.
Maybe even forever.
Yeah. For certain organizations that have so many workloads, they're probably going to be hybrid for the foreseeable future.
Right.
But in a smaller demographic where maybe you have 10 to a couple hundred people, there's a lot more options because you're a bit smaller. You're going to have a lot less footprint than, say, a company with 10,000 people.
True.
Right.
Yeah.
So you know, most of the people that'll be watching this are going to have options, and they should be scrutinizing those options. Stefan, maybe you could go over just on a high level across all three types of environments. What are your thoughts, right? What should we share with the viewer about these types of setups and what you're seeing?
Well, yeah, of course. I would like to move to the cloud as soon as possible. But I still understand that you might need a hybrid environment for some of your apps, and that's fine because we can still manage it. It's just it could be a little bit more expensive to have because you need your servers. And still, we can put it in Azure to keep cost a little bit down. So yes, for some companies, I would still look into a hybrid environment. But then I would move as many apps as possible to the cloud.
Yeah. And by moving those apps to the cloud, there's two different directions you could take. You could like move the application entirely and the business operations and the workflow to a SaaS application in the browser. Maybe your current vendor supports that, maybe they don't. Or you could do what's called lift and shift, right? So you could take that same business application and host both the access to it in a virtual desktop and the backend database or the application itself in Azure. And that way, as we talked about before, you have the scalability, the resiliency, all these sorts of benefits from the cloud. So you could do that with either Windows 365 with cloud PCs. You could also do that with Azure Virtual Desktop. And you could do it with a full virtual desktop experience or just the application itself. You could literally render that program in Azure on your local laptop like it's running installed.
Correct. A remote app.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's a lot of different options there. And that goes back to all those things that we were talking about. You know, what's the right cost? What's the right risk tolerance? What are your users used to dealing with? All these factors really come into play to make a sound decision around this. Yeah, I mean, I think we covered quite a lot.
Well, maybe an example. We had a customer a while ago, and he was traveling, and of course, the customer lost his laptop, and he needed access now. So we told him, well, go to Target, get a computer. Unfortunately, they didn't have Pro machines, but we were able to upgrade the machine to Pro. And I think customer used the Target guest Wi-Fi network to join their machine to the tenant.
Yeah.
And customer had access within 15, 20 minutes.
Yep. Yeah, no, it definitely gives much more increased pace, resiliency in a lot of cases, scalability. There's many benefits to the cloud. And so I think, yeah, it really boils down to trying to figure out for each operational area of your business, which of those should be on-premise or which should be in the cloud. And analyzing that sort of in depth, because I think both of them are really fantastic options. But,
they are, but I do think that a legacy environment or a hybrid adds a lot of complexity.
It does,
You
yeah.
need to keep that in mind. So if you're cloud only, your environment is usually more simple. For example, the user we joined, it was on a public Wi-Fi network. In the legacy environment, that would be completely unsafe because it's an open Wi-Fi network. But the cloud is more about security of the user instead of the network. So the user was still able to join the network on a public Wi-Fi network. Sounds a little bit weird, but because you're on a public Wi-Fi network, it's unsecured, it's all unencrypted, but the traffic to Microsoft is encrypted. And security is based on the user instead of their network or device.
Yeah. Well, cool. I think that covers quite a lot, I think, in terms of these different types of setups. And yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else to add here.
Yeah, I was thinking about the legacy environment. Do you know the movie with Kevin Costner? What was it again? We're safe behind our walls.
Yeah.
That's an example of the legacy environment. Their perimeter was secured, but then of course
The cannonballs are coming in too quickly. Yeah, just tearing the wall down. Yeah, and like you said, I mean, there is, with the benefits of on-premise, there is the additional like added overhead. You need third-party software to actually be able to audit what's going on. You know, stuff like that is already out of the box with SharePoint, for example. And many companies that we come across, they have no auditing. So if they have a security incident, discovering where exactly that's coming from, it's just all slower. And so now you're having to use third-party tools for that, and you're having to bolt on these different things to try to get the features that you really need.
And in the Microsoft Cloud, most security is free, is included in your license.
Yeah.